Hello, my name is Alexandria Ollie, and I am from discussion section AO2. I identify as a woman, and my heritage is connected to my Egyptian roots. This connection ties me equally to Africa due to its geographical factors, and to Arab and Middle Eastern culture, reflected in similarities in tradition, religion, food, and language. My parents are incredibly hardworking individuals who have built stable lives despite facing challenges such as orphanism and family conflict. Because of them, I have been lucky enough to grow up with good money. Their resilience has shaped my own values and perspective as well. In addition, growing up with two brothers and being constantly surrounded by diverse groups of people in things like my school in Los Angeles or my job at the hospital or in food service have given me the ability to read and connect with individuals across differences. My positionality, culture ties, personal experiences, and privileges have shaped how I engage with the following material. For my retrospective analysis, I chose week 8, and the concept I chose was contested territories, which I defined as the dispute between regions or people over land. This concept is important because it can lead to settler colonialism and therefore the erasure of cultures and the concept of landless belonging. I found an example from the text The Israel-Palestine Conflict, 100 Years of War by James L. Gelvin, where it states, Jewish immigrants and their descendants, guided by the nationalist ideology of Zionism, and the Palestinian Arab inhabitants among whom the Zionists settled, both claimed an exclusive right to inhabit and control some or all of Palestine. This text explains the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which begins from the wars following the year 1948, where Palestinians fled from Israel to the West Bank in Palestine. This text explains religious connection to land on both sides of the conflict, specifically the capital of both Israel and Palestine, which is Jerusalem. For Jewish people, this region has been quote-unquote significant as a religious center and pilgrimage site, while for Muslims, it is the site for which Muhammad ascended to heaven on his famous night journey. Although some stances take place from Zionist or anti-Semitic beliefs, the general conflict is summarized by the struggle for control over Palestinian land from two conflicting nationalist movements, which is almost the exact definition I described for contested territories. Another example I found was from Dr. Gozen's lecture. This conflict is similar to settler colonialism amongst the Native American people. Historically, we know that the conflict of land between the indigenous people and the Europeans straight from the arrival of Europeans in the soon-to-be Americas, and therefore the invasion of the Native American land. Dr. Gozen quotes that this act can be described as a cultural genocide and elimination of indigenous society. This ties to the concept of landless belonging. That's my second concept that I chose, and I described that as the spiritual, physical, or emotional connection of a person to their lost land due to systemic erasure. This is important because it highlights resilience and the preservation of culture despite displacement. I found an example from the lecture Garifuna Activist Positionality and Ancestral Memory, which states, in Central America, Garinagu notions of black indigeneity are bound to land and cultural traditions. Claiming indigeneity is a political move to secure land rights, tenure, and titles. This is more of a specific example of landless belongings, as it represents the cultural crave that still stands after one is displaced. In different examples, these sense of belongings have been acted out both internally and externally or physically. And my aha moment of the week was reading the Israel-Palestine conflict text. I believe that because my generation happens to rely on information from social media, we are oftentimes misinformed or are not told the full truth. I thought it was very refreshing to read the history of the conflict, especially one that acknowledges both anti-Semitic and Zionist beliefs on both sides. Next, the week I chose was week 9, and the first concept I chose was de facto status crimes, which is the perception that a person of a certain status is certain to commit future crimes and may well have already committed crimes unwitnessed. This is important because it describes underlying beliefs that tie into law that disproportionately targets certain groups in order to criminalize not their behavior but their identity. For example, it describes the racist history that backs laws such as stop and frisk abilities, which allow the police to question quote-unquote suspicious-looking people, which just so happen to disproportionately disproportionately target Black communities. An example from the text that I found was from Except as Punishment for a Crime, the 13th Amendment and the Rebirth of Chattel Imprisonment by Dennis Childs, which reads, the various models of legal discourse that allowed for the sale or lease of convicted bodies, such as those of Purdy, Richard Harris, John Johnson, and Dilly Harris, through criminal sanctions supply a great deal of critical information insofar as they elucidate the conditions of possibility for the collective violence that Black people have endured in the context of de jure freedom. The text references the legal discourse through criminal sanction. This refers to the arrest of the Black people as a result of minor offenses. This not only has underlying racist terms, but also is carried out in the prisons, where, despite slavery being abolished, our prisoners are forced into unwanted labor, oftentimes grueling and unnecessary. The definition of a slave is one who endures exhausting labor or restricted freedom, and this is exactly what I just described. Another example I found was from Dr. Gozen's lecture. In her presentation, she defined an unjust law, which is Page Law of 1875, which prohibited the importation of unfree laborers and women brought for immoral purposes. According to the description, this law was backed by racist ways and aimed at restricting Asian immigration in the United States. I did some additional research and found that this law specifically targeted Chinese women, backed by the stereotype that they were sex workers and therefore immoral laborers. And I connect this to a general key term. Just to point it out, I wrote that a criminal is defined as one who is illegal. And I wrote that, in my opinion, this highlights the overuse of the word criminalization and places innocent people into a category that does not define them. My aha moment of the week, I think the concept of de facto status crime in general was my aha moment. I'm a Marshall student and therefore had to take the DOC series. In those classes, I learned similar content to those of this week about the 13th Amendment and how it disproportionately targets African American people and immerses them in the incarceration system, which happens to be extremely corrupt. And my personal impact reflection, the topic that impacted me the most was incarceration and recklessness. Like I stated before, I took the DOC series, and following learning about the 13th Amendment in that class, I was motivated to make a change regarding formerly incarcerated people. I am so disheartened by the prison system that I joined a club called HARP, Health and Anti-Recidivism Project, which aims at providing mental health initiatives and funding for formerly incarcerated people in order to prevent recidivism or arrest a second time. This topic is one I aim to fix about the American government in the future and is one that I enjoy learning about in class. Thank you.